Hey there, Pro Church Media community, this is Jason again, and in this tutorial, let's take a look at something that I've seen a lot of requests for recently in the Pro Church Media community Facebook group, and that's how to create something like this. So basically you have a video inside of a frame, maybe there's a creative background, some different graphical elements around, and then you have this text that is almost like captions that goes along with what's being said as it's being said. And it's not a terribly difficult thing to make as long as you know how to do it. And so we're going to be looking at how to do it inside of both After Effects and in Photoshop. So if you're comfortable with either of those, you'll be able to make these sort of things pretty easily. Let's jump into After Effects. I built this little project out. It's based on Dante's Divine Comedy, the Paradiso, Canto 33, which is basically the very end of the Divine Comedy. Dante himself is caught up in a vision of the beatific vision, the vision of God. It's just a very moving climax to the entire work, and it's so indescribable to him that he, basically has trouble even poetically describing it, and so it's just pretty amazing. And I thought this would be a fun thing to kind of build this project around, also because I don't have any sermon clips to use right at the moment. So let's just look at how this is going to go.
Like the geometer who gives himself wholly to measuring the circle, nor by thinking finds the principle he needs. Even such was I at that new sight. But like a smoothly moving wheel, that love was now resolving my desire and will, which moves the sun and all the other stars.
Alright, so you can see we got quite a bit of stuff going on here. This photo in the background, which is from Gustave Doré, nice woodcut that very beautifully illustrates this scene. It's basically kind of just scaling up and has a little bit of rotation to it. I have these rings, which are symbolic of the Trinity. In this canto, he describes what is indescribable as these sort of differently hued rings that kind of move in and out of themselves, and he finds himself, like it says here, caught up in that wheel of love that moves everything in the universe. And so I thought this would be a nice little element to add to this to illustrate this entire scene. And so we have these rings also scaling up. This gradient is kind of moving around, and because these are scaling at different rates, there's a nice kind of parallax effect going on. And then we also have obviously the text moving in time with the audio, and then some different graphical elements, basically these black boxes that highlight different important words in each of the lines. And so this is what we're going to be doing in this tutorial, so let's get right into it. I'm going to start with a new composition. I'll just call it Dante, and I'll do 1080 by 1920, 30 frame rate, maybe about 22 seconds long. Alright, so let me drop my audio in there just to kind of get a sense of how long I need this to be. I might just move it in a little bit because I know the audio starts right away. And then I want my comp to end right here, so I'll just pull in the work area, and then if you hold Command Shift and then push X, it'll trim your comp to the work area. So that's a nice little tip right there. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is put in my image here, and I'm just going to kind of move it up over here. We're going to be masking it. Actually going to be using a track mat for it because the track mat is not attached to the graphics. So I think this is a good position for it right now. And I'm just going to kind of draw a nice big circle here. Maybe something like that. Let's try right there. Okay, and then it doesn't matter what color it is. And then come down to my image, go to track mat and say add mat, and now you can see only the image. The image only shows up within that circle. Okay, I think I might try to get this. I want my image to scale from this bright sun here in the middle, and I want this sun to kind of also maybe be about where the center of this other circle is. And so I want to get my anchor point right here, right there, just for a reference. So if you select your layer, hold Command and double click the pan behind tool, it's going to center up the anchor point on the layer, and then I'll just roughly pull this down right there. And then of course I want the anchor point of this to be on that sun too, so I'll just move it up there, and now you can see as I scale it, it scales from there. Whereas if I, let's say, moved it over here and scaled it, it would scale. Oops, I hit the wrong button. Scale from there, which I don't want. So we'll just make sure our anchor point's right there and we'll be good. So let's do the motion for this. I'm going to add a keyframe on the scale. If you push S, it'll reveal that. And then I'm going to hold Shift and push R, and that'll pull up the rotation. And now I might start from like, say, -6 or something like that. And then let's go all the way to the end. Maybe we'll go to +6 for the rotation, just nice and subtle. And then scale, let's just maybe something like that. Let's see what that looks like.
Like the geometer who gives...
Yeah, it looks pretty good. I'm going to turn off the audio for a second. Yeah, I don't want it to be too overwhelming, but that'll be good. All right, now let's make these, let's make these rings that we had in the previous version. So I'm going to cheat a little bit by duplicating this layer and just using it as my circle so I don't have to draw a new one. Just make sure I activate it. And I want to get rid of the fill, and then I want to add a stroke. Doesn't matter what color, because we'll be adding a gradient later. I think about 16 will work. All right, so one thing to note when you're using shape layers, if you have a stroke and you scale the entire layer, you can see that as I go down, the stroke is getting thinner because the whole layer is getting smaller, and if I go bigger, it gets bigger. If you want to keep the stroke width the same size as you scale it, what you want to do is twirl down this more, come to Contents, and then to Ellipse, then to Ellipse Path, and you'll see this size right here. And so now if you scale it down with this size, you can see it stays the same width, and if I go up, it's still the same width. So that's just a quick little tip on how to keep your shapes strokes the same. So I'm gonna go down maybe to like right there for my first one. Cool. And then let's duplicate this, and well, before I do that, actually I'm going to size, add a keyframe there, and then scale it up maybe to about right there. And then I'm just going to be using what I've already done here for the other rings. So now I'll duplicate this and twirl down on the size, and if you click on the size, it'll select all the keyframes, and now I can scale it up at the same time, both of those keyframes, and so now my animation is already done. So that's a nice little tip there too. And then one more time, duplicate this one, come down to the path, make sure I click the size so that they're both highlighted, and then scale this up again, try to be equidistant there, which I think that's pretty close. And now we can see they're all scaling up at the same rate. And I think my image is maybe scaling up too much. I want these to not go at the same rate, just so I get a little bit of parallax like that. So I think that'll work. Okay, let's clean this up a little bit. I'm gonna call this matte. Now I'll call this rings. All right, and for the gradient, there's a couple different ways in After Effects you can add gradients to things, but for this I'm going to be using a layer style. So I'm going to right click on this, go down to layer styles, and then say gradient overlay. And so now I can twirl down my layer styles and then gradient overlay, and then come to edit gradient to change my gradient. So let's start with a nice kind of vibrant pink, maybe almost a salmon-y pink like that. That looks good. And then for the white, we'll change it to more of a vibrant orange. It'd be something like that. That looks good. All right, you might try rotating this layer as a whole, and you can see nothing happens to the gradient. That's because the gradient layer style is just applied to the layer as a whole, and so it's just not going to rotate with this. If you do want to rotate a gradient layer style, you just come down here, gradient overlay, and then come to this angle, set a keyframe there, and let's just go maybe like 4 revolutions just so we get a nice, yeah, you can see it's rotating already, and I think that looks pretty nice. So let's maybe go with that. Okay, cool. So we have our image scaling, we have our rings. I'm gonna go to composition settings, make sure my background color is white. That looks good. All right, so let's now get into the text. All right, for the text, I'm gonna add a few guides just so I can kind of keep everything aligned as I go through, so maybe something like that. So basically my first line is gonna butt up there, and then everything else will be left aligned, except when I want to stylistically change it. And so before I put my text in, I'm just going to make sure it's styled correctly. I want Proxima Nova bold italic. Proxima Nova is a Typekit font, so if you have Adobe Creative Cloud, you have access to that. Be sure to check it out. It's a great all-around font. I want it to be all caps, and then the rest of these things I think will be great, so let's just go with that. If you click Command T, that'll bring up your text tool, and then you can just put your text in there. And I believe the first line is like a geometer. Looks good, and I'll deal with the gradients later. So let's just put that there and make sure my audio is on. Okay, so for when you're trying to sync up audio, sometimes it's easier to twirl down the waveform just so you can kind of see where the words start and end and things like that. This is more of a general idea because you can see these don't really look like too much, but they can give you kind of a rough sense of where stuff starts, and then you can fine tune later. So let's just play this back real quick.
Like the geometry.
Okay, so you can see this is where the first line starts. So I'll just move my text in right there. Let's see if that works.
Like the geometry.
Perfect. And another trick in After Effects that's really nice is if you hold Command, you can scrub through the audio, just get a really fine-tuned sense of where everything is. So,
like the geometer.
So you can see that's about where who starts. So I'm just going to duplicate this, trim it back over here, move it down a little bit. And what was that line? Unfortunately, I don't know my Dante as well as I should. Who gives? Okay. Who gives? And then I know the next line will be himself. So that's about right there. So I'm going to duplicate this again and maybe pull it down here. You can see I have everything left aligned so that when I need to scale this up, it's already scaling from right over there, which is nice. Himself. Okay. And I could probably make this a little bit bigger. Let's try that. Alright, that looks nice. Okay. Now I need to trim it over here, and I think we'll be good. Let's just play this back to see what it looks like.
Like the geometer who gives himself wholly to me.
And I apologize for it sputtering because my computer's doing like 50 things at once.
Like the geometer who gives himself.
Okay, that looks good. And then I think I'll split all these right here so I can get rid of the end without having to trim everything in. So if you select your layers and then set your marker to want to split it, hit Command Shift and then push D to split, duplicate it, and then just hit Delete to get rid of everything at the end. Okay. Before we go any further, I want to give these a nice gradient. So I'm going to use the, I believe I used the gradient ramp over here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is add the gradient ramp effect. And the reason I'm doing this rather than the layer styles, we'll see this a little bit later, but if you have the gradient layer style is based on the actual pixels of the layer. So if you have like a situation, like if I did like A first and then geometer a little bit after that, the gradient's going to shift as you get more pixels in there. However, the gradient ramp effect just is based on the actual size of the composition or of, yeah. And so let's add the gradient ramp. You can go to Effect, Generate, Gradient Ramp. And then, so this is going to be your start point up here, actually, yeah, your start of ramp, and then your end of ramp. And so you just kind of have to get those in there the way you want them. And so I'm just going to sample colors from my rings. So for my, I actually kind of probably want them to go this way, don't I? So let's do that. Okay, so for the black, I want to maybe do this pink. And then for the white, I want to do this yellow. Yeah, that looks good. Now that I have that done, I can just copy this and then paste it onto these other ones, and we have our text gradient just like that. All right, and the last thing I want to do for this text stack right here is just to add that kind of black box. So I'm just getting another shape tool, and I'm just going to draw a box over here, just offsetting it from the text a little bit just to stylize it a bit. something like that. I might call it box and make sure it starts right there. Let's see what this looks like.
Gives himself wholly.
I think that'll look good. And if sometimes you might accidentally snap to these guides, if you want to get rid of those temporarily, just push Command and colon or semicolon and it'll get rid of the guides temporarily, but then you can do the same thing to bring them back. Cool. All right. And then like I did with those text layers, I'm just gonna Command Shift D to duplicate that, get rid of it, and we're good. Okay. So for the next line, since I already have all this stylized and things like that, I'm just gonna duplicate them, pull them above, and then move them over here. All right, so let's see what we got next.
Himself wholly to make.
Holy. I know that holy is the bigger text. So let's pull this all the way over here. Get those guides back, bring it up there, and say holy. Oops, two L's. Let's see what the other lines. To measuring the circle. Okay. And for now, I'm just gonna get my text in there. Circle. All right, and I'll just position these a little bit. Might move this over there. Oops. And move this one over there. I think this needs a comma. All right, let's time these out.
Himself wholly to measuring the.
Yes, that's where 2 goes, and I might put that. Oops, wrong one.
To measuring the.
I know this kind of sounds weird right now, but the more you scrub audio, the more it sounds natural, which is kind of weird, but
Himself wholly to measuring the circle.
that looks good. Okay. So now I need to bring my black box over here. I'll just get rid of my guides for right now. Maybe something like this. And I'm just pulling on these corner or sides and top just to kind of scale this a little bit how I want it.
Himself wholly to measuring the circle. Nor
Alright, so this is where my next line starts, and after this one we'll move over to Photoshop. So I'm going to duplicate this again, pull them up above, drag it over, and let's see what this next line is. Nor by thinking finds the principle. So in this one you can see it starts with nor, then goes to by thinking, but it's all on the same text layer. So let's look at how to do that real quick. Alright, so I know this needs to go back. Let's pull this box back. Get my guides back. There we go. So with this, it's usually best to write out the entire thing. So nor by thinking. Let's just get all the stuff lined up and then we'll deal with this.
nor by thinking find.
That's where finds the principle. I know this looks like a mess right now, but we'll clean it up here in a second. And this is he needs. Okay. Cool. Bring that up a little bit. Okay. So what I'm going to do is scrub through to where by thinking starts. Right there. So now I need to twirl this down, go to text, source text. And so that's basically setting a keyframe there, which is saying this is what the text will be at this keyframe. And it's a hold keyframe, which is saying hold this until the next keyframe. And so now at the very beginning, all I have to do is just delete that, and then you can see how this works.
Nor by thinking find principle.
And we're going to do the same thing with he needs. So that's about where needs starts. So we're going to do the same thing. Twirl this down, text, source text. So he needs is what I want. And then back to the beginning, we'll get rid of needs. And let's see if that works.
Principle he needs.
Perfect. All right, so make sure my box is right at that keyframe there. Pull it down over here, maybe scale it in a bit. I think something like that will work. Let's see what we got so far.
Like the geometer who gives himself wholly to measuring the circle, nor by thinking finds the principle he needs.
Perfect, okay. And I'm not going to do the entire thing that I did just because it's going to take too long, but I think you now have a pretty good idea of just how this process works. You can see it's pretty super simple. It's mostly just laying out the text, timing it differently, trimming things up. And so not too terribly difficult to get just a cool little video pretty quickly. So that's how you do it in After Effects. Let's move into Photoshop. Alright, so here in Photoshop, and the first thing I want to do is make sure my timeline is visible. So I'm going to go to Window, Timeline, and my background layer is already in there. Before you get going, you want to make sure your frame rate is what you want. I want it to be 30 frames a second, so that works. Also, anytime you place anything or create like a shape layer or text or whatever, it's going to place it wherever your marker is, so just make sure it's where you want it to be. So I'm going to add that image real quick, put that in there, just scale it up a bit. Let's try that, place it, and then maybe need to be a little bit bigger. Let's do that. Okay, I'm going to use a circle as the mask for this, so I'm just going to draw a nice big circle here. Make sure it has a fill rather than a stroke. Doesn't matter what color it is. And then I'm going to put it below my image, and then we're going to make this into a clipping mask. So just right click and go to create clipping mask. And now I just want to make sure maybe that this lines up right there, and I think that'll work. And the nice thing is I can move this around pretty easily wherever I want to and just fine tune it, so that's great. Alright, now we just need to make sure these go all the way to the end. And we're going to add our animation to the image, so just twirl this down, come to transform, and I might move the rotation just a bit, and I'll go to the very end here and do the free transform and make sure my anchor point is in the center of that sun like we did in After Effects, and just pull this maybe over like that. Hold Shift Alt to constrain the proportions as you scale it, and I think that will work pretty nicely, and we have our animation in Photoshop, which is pretty easy to do, so be sure to play around with it sometime. Alright, so let's go ahead and make our rings. I'm going to just do another circle here, maybe something like that. Already has a stroke on it, and I think it's 12. That's great. Just kind of line it up there. I'm going to duplicate it by doing Command J. Just scale it up a bit, like so. Same procedure for my last ring. I think that will work. I might need to make all these just a bit bigger to start with. Oops. Let's go ahead and group them. That'll make it easier. Then we can just scale it up like that. Okay. Unfortunately, for some reason in Photoshop, you can't you can't animate the scale of a shape layer. So the way around it is to basically get it into a group, or yeah, something like that, and then get it to where you want, as big as you want it to be. So maybe something like that for what I want, and then convert it to a smart object. And now I'll be able to animate this as I want to. So I already have it at the end point, so I'm just going to go to the end and animate in reverse. So I'll twirl down on this, keyframe on transform, come all the way to the beginning, scale it down a bit like that, and I think we'll be good to go. That's not too bad. I might make it go from a little bit smaller, just so I get more of that parallax. Yeah, something like that will probably work. Okay, cool. Let's call this rings. Alright, now we need to add a gradient to this, so I'm going to double click and come to Gradient Overlay, and I already had the gradient from before, so we'll just go with that. And I'm going to stick this angle at 0, and we'll be good to go there. And so you can actually animate the style, so I'm going to put a keyframe on style, then come all the way to the end. It's a bit more limiting because it doesn't have revolutions, but I will do, instead of 360, I'll do 359, just so we get close to a full revolution. And so now you can see it's rotating a bit. So we got that going on. Okay, so we're good to go with our animation all there. Now we just need to add our audio and then get our text going on. To add audio, you just want to come to this audio track and then click Add Audio. and then find your audio track and just place it in there. And I'm just going to move this in a little bit like so. Okay, so Photoshop is a bit more limiting in that you can't scrub through the audio, so you just kind of have to listen and kind of guess and keep playing back until you hear it. But you can listen to it, so let's just play it back real quick.
Like the geometer.
Okay, so that's probably where I need to start. So again, I'm going to add some guides just to kind of get everything. That looks like I already had one, so we'll just go with that and put that there. Okay, so I'm just going to hit T to bring up my text tool, and Proxima Nova, bold italic, 76 should probably work. Make sure it's left justified, and I think I have it on all caps. Looks good. Okay, so like the geometer, put that in there, and you can see since I had my marker there, that's where it put it.
Like the geometer.
And that's probably where my next one's going to be, so I can duplicate this, pull it down, and what was that line?
Who gives himself.
Yeah, who gives. Okay, let's do who gives, and then duplicate this again. Let's see where it needs to go.
Who gives.
It's probably about where it starts. Make it a little bit bigger. Himself. Make it a little bit bigger. Something like that. Okay. And I just did something I didn't want to do. Okay, there we go. And pull this over. Let's see.
Who gives.
See what that looks like.
Like the geometer who gives himself.
Okay, so that's probably about where it ends. Something like that. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and put all of this into a group. So then what I can do is add that gradient overlay that we had before. And so now I don't have to apply it to every single layer. That looks good.
Like the geometer who gives himself.
And so every bit of text I'm gonna put into this group. And then for my boxes, I'm just going to put them below so they don't get the gradient as well. Okay, so let's make our little box. I need my rectangle tool, get rid of the stroke, make sure it's black, and we'll just put it behind this text, and it automatically put it into that group, but I can just move this down out of that group, and now you can see it's black, which is how I want it. Okay, cool. And so I might basically just call this text, so I always have a good reference, and then I'll just call this box. All right, let's move on to the next line.
Himself holy.
Okay, so this is probably where the next line starts. I'm going to duplicate this and say holy, move it up and over, duplicate my box, make sure it's under the holy, duplicate like the geometer, and you can move these up just to kind of keep them a little bit organized if you can. Accidentally took those out of the group, it looks like. There we go. Okay.
Holy to.
What was our line here? Holy to measure in the circle. Okay. I think that's about where it starts. To measuring, pull this over a bit, that box up. So I'm going to duplicate this, bring it down.
Measuring.
That's probably about where it starts. So you can see I'm just kind of guessing with the audio a little bit and then going back to make sure I get it right. Let's listen to that.
Himself holy to measuring the circle.
That's probably about where the next line starts, so I'm just going to trim these up. And unfortunately, you can't really do the same sort of source text thing that we did in After Effects, so I'm just going to have to go ahead and do each line differently. So let me trim that box back. So this will be that nor by thinking, or by, yeah, nor, I believe. Let's see what it said. Nor by thinking finds the principle he needs. Okay. So we'll do nor right there.
Nor.
And then we're going to duplicate this. And I'm just going to do the entire line, and I think that will be easier. And then I'll just trim up this one here.
Nor by thinking.
I think this is where the next line goes, so we'll duplicate that, and this pull this down, and this should be finds the principle.
Finds the principle.
And then this is about where he needs is, so we'll duplicate that, and we're going to do the same thing here. So he, I need to make this bigger, maybe something like that.
The principle he needs. He needs.
So this is about where needs is, so trim that up, and then duplicate it, and he needs, and we'll see what that looks like.
Or by thinking finds the principle he needs.
Perfect. And then we just need to duplicate that box, and it duplicated it right where that mark is, which is nice. And so I'm just going to pull this box over here, maybe scale it back a bit, and I think we're good. Let's look at this again.
Like the geometer who gives himself wholly to measuring the circle, nor by thinking finds the principle he needs.
Perfect. So you can see you can do this in Photoshop as well as in After Effects. It's not terribly difficult. When I first did this, it only took me about 10 minutes or so, mostly because I wasn't trying to do a tutorial at the same time. So get into After Effects or Photoshop, try this out, see what you think, make some cool stuff, and I will talk to you later.